Welcome to the House by Vasor podcast. I'm your host, William, and join me daily with Sean.
Hello.
And we'll be discussing the new Netflix original film, Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. This is a long title.
And if you're playing the drinking game, one they say in the movie, too.
yeah, because it's from like the court trial, like what one of the judges said. So, Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. This is not an Austin Powers sequel with Dr. Evil or something.
Although the person that says it is bald.
Yeah, John Malkovich getting that Netflix money.
Spoiler alert. I feel like he just hangs out in the offices, and anytime they're shooting a film, he just walks on and picks up a paycheck.
Yeah, he's like, guys. And if you're listening via the podcast or you're watching on YouTube, the audio might be a little bit different because we're using some different microphones for this. So if you hate it, like it, whatever, let us know in the comments because it's we're using some wireless lav mics that doesn't require us to have the microphone sitting in front of us.
And it will not be changed for the next episode because we're recording 2 back-to-back. So
let
us know, but if we don't change it right away, that's why.
Yeah, so we're recording 2 episodes back-to-back. So this episode we're doing the Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile, the Ted Bundy, Netflix, Zac Efron movie. Then the next episode will be My Friend Dahmer, just as a true crime drama movie doubleheader. So that's what the next episode is. Because initially we were going to make this a double episode, but there's not as many things to really compare between the movies as initially thought. But yes, we're starting off with the Ted Bundy one, just because that's on Netflix now, so you can go out and check it.
And it's the newest one.
It's new. It just came out. And at least for anybody that's in the Louisville, Indiana, Ohio area, it was shot in northern Kentucky. And I know there was some local talent that from Louisville that was able to be a part of the movie in some roles or some shape or form. Now, it wasn't the way a lot of these types of, like at least with Kentucky, when they give all these tax incentives for people to shoot films here, it's not that they come into town and then cast the entire movie. It's they come in with most things already kind of filled out and then just fill in some of the day players to be like PAs and some of the smaller, lower level, below the line positions. And then they cast for extras or small, like non-speaking background roles.
Yeah. Which since that tax incentive thing came in, there was a lot of people I talked to when I was on one film set that, worked other places that moved here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it was electrical department. It was like a lot of departments I think like moved here because there was going to be enough, and then they could kind of travel, to Ohio or something if they needed to for certain jobs. But yeah, I think as far as I know, a lot of the DPs at least, and directors and stuff writers are not from here. But hey, it's giving people here work, and films are being shot here. But I think that's on hold now, right?
I think what they did was they got rid of the credits. They're not going to be granting any new ones, but the ones that had already been granted previously are still being honored if they get into production by a certain time. So, but I think too, for a lot of people here, people really pushed for and wanted it to continue happening, but it was more of like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah.
I can go sit around on a set and see Nicolas Cage or John Malkovich, but it's like, yeah, but that's really not making a ton of money.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that shakes out. But
and sometimes that stuff takes time. You know what I mean? Like when you're going to start, just like Atlanta. You know what I mean? Like I don't think we're going to be like Atlanta. We're not that city, but sometimes it takes a while, and then it could build an infrastructure that could maybe create a lot of consistent jobs here. But what I had heard is that even though it's on hold, like there's a better chance now for it to become reinstated, just because the balls I guess already been rolling before and stuff.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But just, that was just some behind the scenes stuff to say, like a lot of times, because I know like Louisiana had a bunch of film incentives.
Yeah,
and
Get Out was shot there, right?
I think they may have shot some in Alabama.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember, because there's been different states that over time introduced these film credits or tax credits for film. And then a bunch of productions go there just to get the bottom dollar prices. And then the second that the state stops offering it, they go to the next state that offers it.
Yeah.
Which is, business sense. Since we are never going to, at this point, seemingly have enough budget to ever take advantage of a tax credit, we can just shoot wherever. But yeah, so getting into the...
Never say never.
Yeah, never say never. Hopefully we will, but just right now we're not. But yeah, so... Getting into discussing Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. So this is based on Ted Bundy. Did you see the Ted Bundy tapes, the Netflix documentary? So it's from the same guy that directed this movie. And that was like a 4-episode series that was, I think, like an hour long per episode. And I actually think that it is interesting the kind of lines that we're crossing with some of this stuff. It's like, so where does true crime end at being a cultural curiosity, and where does it step over the line to become like schlocky entertainment? The documentary for Ted Bundy, I don't think stepped over the line really, because it was pretty factual. There wasn't, sensationalization, and it wasn't portraying him. I mean, because I remember Netflix did post from their like official Twitter account, like, we literally have thousands of movies starring men that aren't Ted Bundy that you can thirst over.
Yeah.
Because women were like, oh, Ted Bundy's actually pretty cute, or men, whoever, and they then posted like, there's literally anyone else on our service you can lust after that's not him. And so that was what the documentary inspired a little bit of, but it was a lot of facts about it, and it showed how inept law enforcement was in terms of like interstate communication in the 70s and 80s, and how in the 60s, how somebody could go and do a bunch of stuff in one town, move a state over, and it would take quite a while for them to connect the dots. Like, oh, this is because back then there weren't interconnected databases like the internet. There wasn't Google search. There wasn't, these databases they could type in all this information that anyone could pull from. So, because even as recent as like 2010, I think, I was in Colorado and somebody got a speeding ticket, and we looked it up, and like the Colorado system wasn't connected to the Kentucky system, so the points wouldn't transfer against your license. So that was, as recent as the past 10 years, some stuff's not connected. So Ted Bundy was able to get away with what he did for as long as he did, because law enforcement didn't immediately say, oh, this MO fits this one from this other state, and then cross-reference like who was looked at. Like, they didn't do that. So that's why he was able to get away.
This was starting the boom and I guess identification of serial killers.
Yeah, because that
you watch Mindhunter, even if you don't follow, if you just watch stuff that's on Netflix. Yeah,
because what they used to
get your whole serial killer education just by having a Netflix subscription.
Yeah, because it used to be like a sequence killer before serial killer was like the defined term. And yeah, so the idea that Ted Bundy did all this stuff, I mean, I don't think it'd be as easy to do it today, because today's world with the internet and 24-hour news and everything, it would be a little bit more difficult for someone to pull that off to the scale that he did.
As brazenly too. You know what I mean?
And two, he unlike what this movie and the documentary portrayed, like he was like a normal looking guy. Then I guess was just like unassuming enough that people are like, oh no, he couldn't be the killer.
Yeah.
He's a law student. So you had some element of like that type of thing going on. And the movie cast Zac Efron, and he's in better shape than Ted Bundy ever was. And I think they cast him to kind of portray like, oh, he was a normal looking guy that could meet women, so people didn't think that he was a killer. But yeah, I guess we can kind of like, so if you know the real world story or what happened in real life with Ted Bundy, there's some stuff you can't really spoil in the movie because it's based on that. Like,
I mean, even still, like to kind of set a baseline, like I am not somebody who studies serial killers, and like I have a general knowledge just from osmosis, you know what I mean? Osmosis of culturally.
Yeah.
But I don't watch a lot of, like I'll watch some of the documentaries and stuff, but not a whole lot. So I'm not somebody who like was intimately familiar with all the details, So, and I think it's a different thing with movies now. It seems like people are wanting a shift more, where something, I hate to bring it up, but it is somewhat related, like something like Avengers Endgame, when people go in knowing what they need to know, and they're confident in making a movie and leaving the people behind that don't know it, only because so many people do. Yeah. And I've heard people talk about the new Pokemon movie is the same way. Like I've never played Pokemon really, or got into it, but they've said, like I've heard some complaints like, hey, if you're not really into it, some of it may be a little bit much. And I saw some people complaining like, well, that's, they made that movie for these people. Like that's what they do now. And I'm wondering if there's more of a shift on that, because this movie, I don't want to say it leaves out a lot, but it feels like a SparkNotes version
of what really happened.
It feels like you're reading a Wikipedia, like three pages of Wikipedia, but it takes you an hour and a half to read it. And I think so it's a weird thing because they don't idolize him necessarily, but they don't demonize him in any way. And I get that the point is like, oh, hey, he was like a kind of normal guy, but it's so weird as far as like who you're supposed to kind of
because it shows
be invested in.
Because it shows a lot of from the perspective of his girlfriend, or at least.
And I think we should do full spoilers on this.
Yeah, we'll do full spoilers because it's based on real life. I mean, if you don't know, Ted Bundy's dead.
And honestly, I don't think there's much in this that's, I don't know. Most movies, I'm like, just watch it first. This one, I'm like, you know what I mean? If you just want to hear about it, like, I think this is, of all movies, it's like, you can kind of just spoil this.
Because Lily Collins plays Liz Kendall, who was his, Ted Bundy's fiance. And like I said, so if you know the real life history of this case, and especially if you've seen the Ted Bundy tapes on Netflix, watching this movie, some of the stuff they play up as a big twist at the end, like you knew going in. So the payoff will your mileage may vary with how much you get out of it based on what you knew about this going in.
I didn't know about that, and again, the twist is that she gave the police the first identification. And even for me not knowing that, I was just like, eh.
Yeah, because, I mean, like I said, because I'd watched the Ted Bundy tapes not too long ago. So going into this, like you said, it is a Cliff Notes version. So to get up front, I think some of the people I've seen, a lot of criticism I saw against the film initially in the horror circles was what people initially complained about when the trailers came out. People were like, oh, this is just glorifying Ted Bundy. If this shows him being super suave and brash and handsome, while then dismembering and mutilating women and violating their corpses and all this stuff, that's just going to be a really bad, example glorifying all this terrible stuff. The movie doesn't do that at all. The movie doesn't show any of the murders, really. It shows, like, maybe one in a flashback later on.
Yeah, but honestly, I almost think that would have at least made you more against him.
Because as is, I guess it was the point was to portray from someone that was close to him, was there plausible deniability that he actually was being framed?
Yeah, but I feel like you still. So the way this film starts is, she's kind of, is she divorced, right? Or did she just
single mom?
Single mom. She's a single mom, and she meets him at a bar, and their relationship just blossoms from there. And it kind of fast forwards and shows that they've been together for a while. But for me, none of that even felt genuine. It felt like I saw somebody compare this to a Lifetime movie version of it, and some elements of this actually does. Like, I was like, okay, I see that comparison. I had forgotten about it until I watched the film, and that comparison popped in my head, only because even the relationship between them, it doesn't feel real in that there's not even conflict in the relationship. Not until he gets in trouble, it's all like sunshine and roses. Like, it doesn't feel like we actually got an intimate look at a real relationship. Yeah. So you don't really get to see how, you don't really get to put yourself in the headspace of her, of how she would have kind of went on with this or kind of been taken in by it.
Well, because you see they meet and he's charming. And then it's just from there, they have like this idyllic fairy tale relationship.
They literally just show a montage of, you know what I mean? And then a couple like extended scenes of them making love. And it never feels real. So you never feel grounded in it. You know what I mean? Like, you never really feel in her shoes because everybody just feels like a broad caricature of these roles.
You don't get a sense of like what in the relationship will make her be compelled to call the police, because in real life, so there was some women that went missing at a music festival, and there was a sketch that got released that looked like Ted Bundy, and it was describing someone that had a Volkswagen Beetle that was wearing a cast on their arm, and was asking women to help get a canoe or boat or something in, and the police released the sketch, and then at some point his fiance called the police and said that looks like Ted Bundy. And then they looked into it and said the color of his car wasn't correct and it wasn't him. So you have that happening. But it didn't really show you because, like, I'm pretty sure that, like, if there was somebody in the news that there was like a local rash of like murders and abductions, and they described and gave a sketch of the culprit, and it looked kind of like you, I don't think Nicole would call the police.
Yeah, I don't.
I don't think that if
yeah, so it's like what we didn't get to see the part of the relationship where
she would even feel the need
where
to do that.
she would ever feel threatened or anything like that. Like you never get to see a dark side to him, and I think that's where the interesting thing would have been in this film to see kind of this split in personality.
I mean, now the thing is, like, in reality, it could just be that she thought that it looked similar, so she was doing that, and just his persona never had any cracks in his personal life, so no one ever sat there. Because if you watch that Ted Bundy tapes documentary, people that he worked with thought he was innocent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because, I mean, in the movie glosses over, it's a very, like, high-level, 30,000-foot view of the entire ordeal, and it doesn't really dig into the fact. So he moved from, like, Seattle, he moved to Utah and became a Mormon, and was in Salt Lake City and stuff. So he was ingrained in that community, and people in that community defended him for a while. So it doesn't really show any of that. And it doesn't really, it shows him get pulled over by the police a few times. And then it shows him, like, in prison, some of the escapes. Because, like, once again, it's kind of a crazy story if you look it up. Because in real life, he escaped from jail twice in 2 different ways. And the movie shows both of those, but doesn't really... It's not really from the perspective of Ted Bundy. Like, it shows things that happen with just him there, and from the perspective of, in the world with him there. So it's kind of a weird movie.
I feel like it has no strong point of view. Something like in any basic film, every scene should build, or you know what I mean. Like, there's no building in this film. It is not like we are progressively getting deeper into the situation or the characters, where you're just shown a scene and really, there's no, like I said, there's no building on that. And there's no character change really. Like Ted Bundy, the way he starts is, you don't really feel like you find out much more about him. Only that, he is adamant that he didn't do it. You know what I mean? Like, there's no change in his character. And so at that point, yeah, we should have maybe, I'm not saying what the film should have done, but maybe focused more on the girlfriend and, like, her change in character and her change in perspective. Like, it felt like it didn't know where it wanted to go, and it was just pieced together without having an audience in mind. You know what I mean? Like, maybe the audience was like, hey, we want to see Zac Efron as Ted Bundy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if that's the audience, then that's fine. But as a movie, I think it fails, pretty hard for me, in that it is never engaging. And 40 minutes in, and I never found one, I was thinking, there's not been one good scene in this movie. Like, where you thought, like, oh, that was a good scene.
Well, because, like, something that I would, to me, like, one of the high bars for a true crime-based property, or, like, if you're taking a true crime type story and adapting it to a film, like, one of the high watermarks is Zodiac. And Zodiac puts you in the shoes of a number of characters that were involved on the periphery of this. It gives you some of the detectives who were investigating it, the newspaper, writer who was kind of like the star writer who was talking about it in the news frequently, and then the cartoonist who was looking into it on his own dime and became obsessed with it. And then it showed you slices of what happened, and, like, when the Zodiac killer killed people. Now, I would assume it's based on the first-hand accounts of the people involved in those situations, but, like, those had momentum and were very effective scenes.
Yeah.
And were, but this movie didn't do that for any individual instance of stuff with Ted Bundy. And then it, like, I don't know, it's kind of, and I think too, part of the other problem was, since it's a Netflix original, there is some prestige factor that comes along with that, where people expect, like, oh, this is, well, I don't know if it's prestige, like Bird Box, which is obviously, like, a movie that was, like, a huge cultural hit. If for nothing else than the Bird Box challenge, but this one doesn't really, to me, have the cultural cachet to be like, oh, everyone's gonna be talking about this.
Yeah.
I think it was just, it's a Zac Efron Ted Bundy movie was the tagline that got Netflix interested, because they looked at, I guess, the crossover of, or I can just turn that off. But they looked at the crossover of, like, these true crime series are really big views. Zac Efron has a pretty good fan base and has been in some big blockbusters like Neighbors.
I like him. Yeah, I love
High School
Neighbors.
Musical. And then it's just, but this movie glances over most of the interesting parts of that story. and I guess part of it is initially people were worried that it would glorify and, what happened with Ted Bundy and make it entertainment. It doesn't do that. It doesn't show.
I would argue it's not entertainment.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say that the big thing it didn't do, to its credit maybe, and maybe this is why some of it falls a little bit flat, is they avoided showing any of the salacious bits. I guess because that wasn't the point of this movie, but in doing so, they left it without a lot to really drive the momentum. Because a lot of times when you look at, because both, a lot of these true crime movies, you look at them, and there's a lot of screenwriting rules about how a movie should move. And you have like a first act, a second act, and a third act, and there's different things that happen that cause the motion of the film and the script to keep moving and have momentum and to build towards something. A lot of times in movies that are based on real life stories, they lack that completely. And it's a character study, but you have to be really into the characters for that to drive it and to be super interested. And a lot of times, if you don't really have much plot structure or story structure, and you don't have a lot of character development, it's just like, here's these interconnected vignettes where you don't really have much driving force. And I would say the movie doesn't really develop much of a driving force till maybe the back half, where it's more of, his fiance character, coming to realize that he is not what he claimed he was and trying to withdraw herself from that situation. And that's really what the story becomes. But since they're never in the same room together and it's only through her watching news and getting phone calls, there's not as much stakes involved. Because the police
and you're not invested in her by that point either. You know what I mean? Like, you've already checked out. Or me personally, I've already checked out.
And the police were never looking at her to charge her with crimes. So there wasn't much mortal danger for her. It's just she was grappling with the ethical implications of like, oh, well, I called and they didn't actually take action on it. So am I responsible for these other women he's killed?
Yeah, I think another problem or maybe a challenge with structuring a story like this, and aside from approaching it as a character study, is that so much of it takes place in chunks of time that move forward. But like I said, they don't feel connected to the previous sequence you saw.
Yeah.
Or it's never feels like, it just feels like a jigsaw that was shaken up. And yeah, chronologically, all this stuff is in the right place, but it doesn't help your investment in the film or help you understand like a deeper understanding of the characters anymore.
Yeah.
Like the character study, I think, does not work because, like I said, there is no change in his character really, but there's no discovery from the audience. Like, even if you don't know he's the killer, like for some weird reason, you're never interested by his character. You know what I mean? Like, there's never a line where you
get one dimension of him.
Yeah, it's so weird that they chose to just go one dimension. Like, and again, there may have been the fear of like, hey, we don't want to glorify these murders, and I totally get that. I'm not for glorifying the murders, but also it's like you're almost, it's almost like they're letting him off the hook a little bit too. It's so weird. It feels unfaithful. It feels unfaithful. I haven't watched the documentary, but it feels unfaithful of how reality works.
I mean, I think the other thing I would say though is, to the movie's credit to some extent, so if you watch the Ted Bundy tapes, throughout his entire trial, he was always like, oh, this is a big misunderstanding, I'm innocent. And then even once he was arrested and charged and convicted and on death row, and he talked to some of the FBI, like criminal profilers, it was never him saying, I did this. It was saying, well, if somebody was to have done a crime like this, and then explain how it would be done. So it could also be that from the perspective they're taking is he never had that facade crack. And even before he was executed, when he gave them the names of some of the victims and locations, he was claiming that, it was just to give them what they wanted to stay off the execution.
Yeah. And so my argument with that would be then if nothing's there, then why make the movie like this? Or why make the movie? You know what I mean? Like, what is the point?
Because
what more do we get out of this perspective than you would get from the tapes?
Because the perspective they had from his fiancée Liz, like, it wasn't because there's entire stretches where you go without seeing her for 10, 15 minutes.
I mean, it feels like a half-hour stretch in the middle. I don't know if that's true, but it felt like a very long time.
it's one of those things where I think some people dismissed it out of hand because it wasn't the gore fest they thought it could be, because they wanted to see just a literal recreation, Game of Thrones style of like vicious violence and stuff on screen with Ted Bundy doing it. And that's what they wanted out of it, and because it wasn't that, they hated it.
And I don't want to glorify those murders, but that would have lent, if his facade never cracked, that would have let the audience, that would have been at least a contrast for the audience to see two sides of this person. You know what I mean? Like, we get it in the timeline and everything, and it would have really drove home the point that of his MO as far as like being pretending to be totally innocent and never admitting, but also being a complete monster at the same time. You know what I mean? Like, it feels like backing down from that was almost a mistake. And if they couldn't find a way to do it in a respectful way that they felt confident in, then they shouldn't have done it, you know? Yeah,
because like even watching like the documentary, the Ted Bundy tapes, it is interesting because there were times watching that documentary where you're like, he is talking, you know, pretty smoothly, and I think that's a lot of why he got away with what he did for as long as he did, was because I think just the facade of I'm a clean-cut white guy who's a law student just gave a lot of leeway for people to say, oh, you're not the type who would murder people.
And I'm from the belief that when you are creating a drama from real life events, I think it's more important to, there's plenty of people that disagree with this, but more important to get to kind of the truth of the events, and I mean like the real truth, versus recreating what actually happens step by step. Like, let's get to the real, what actually, you know what I mean? Like the actual depths of what happened.
I heard a good breakdown of that from The Social Network. It was that in The Social Network, there's a scene where Mark Zuckerberg goes home, and in real life, he drank some Rolling Rock beer, but he drank a bunch of them with the intention of getting drunk and getting hammered. And for the movie, the screenwriter was Aaron Sorkin, wanted to get the point that his plan was to get drunk, to get blackout drunk, was to then switch it from drinking these Rolling Rock like light lager beers to being hard liquor and like whiskey or vodka or something. And was it Fincher was like, well, no, it was Rolling Rock, so it would be accurate. So in getting the facts of the scene correct, when you watch the movie, it doesn't look like his intent was to get blackout drunk. He was just having some beers. Mm-hmm. So the point was that they may have lost the intent of the scene by, you know, the truth of the story was that he went home with the intent of getting drunk. And then what they showed on screen didn't necessarily convey that in the final product. So they could have fudged the actual facts a little bit to get the story across more quickly and succinctly.
Yeah,
and there's plenty of times in movies where you can do that. And this movie...
It did seem like it was from somebody who was obsessed with, you know, that made a documentary. It was like, hey, we're going to have this exact line of dialogue. Yeah. Like, and when you were talking about, you know, the way he kind of like would talk to prosecutors and stuff, you know, in my mind, I was thinking, imagine this written by Sorkin or in a Fincher film, how interesting that could be and how you could really, where you could kind of get to the truth of a lot of it through indirect dialogue. You know, it's through the dialogue, but what the kind of subtext is saying, there could have been so much to mine there, and that could have really created a lot of suspense and tension when really this has none of that. You know, again, another thing you're supposed to do is like paint with emotions when you're making a film. You know, make the audience feel different things, and you don't have to use every emotion, but this just feels like it flatlines for me for so long.
And he does... Like, a lot of the recreations of his wardrobe are accurate. Like, he did show up wearing bow ties and dress snazzy to these different events. And there's just a lot of stuff that I think would have been interesting to cover. Like, part of the reason that he knew how to evade capture by law enforcement was that since, you know, I think he worked on, like, the re-election campaign for Nixon, like, in a small capacity in, like, his local area. And then he worked on a police task force that was about the gaps in law enforcement, which is how he discovered more about, there's not as much interstate communication. So it's showing stuff like that, like not even showing him then utilizing the information, just showing all the bits and pieces of that maybe, and then having that fill in more. Because right now the movie doesn't show enough. I don't know. It just felt like it was like you said, like a Cliff Notes version of this story, but skips over a lot of the interesting points. If you show him getting this information and see kind of like him involve those conversations and the light bulbs going off in his head, and then you like jump to later where it would be apparent that he used that information but is denying it and gaslighting everyone. Like
again, build on scenes. You know what I mean? Like building that would be interesting for the audience.
But they just, like I said, I think they may have been so intent on not glorifying the violence and the murder and the brutality of it that they then skipped around a lot of the most interesting parts. And then to your point, well, what was the goal here? What was the story they really wanted to tell? And like with the girlfriend or his fiance or whatever, like you said, you get like some interactions between them and like a couple of love scenes and stuff like that, but you don't get really a portrait of what was their day-to-day life like. Were there signs that something was going on, or was, because there's some people where they're all veneer. There's no deeper under the surface element. They're all just veneer. Because in my real life, I encounter people. It's like, are you just on like this all the time? Like in your relationships, are you just on like this and there's no depth to it?
But it's like those people crack. No, everybody cracks.
Yeah.
And being in a relationship that long, like we never got to see any of those cracks.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no ways they went 7 years and we didn't get one glimpse of an argument before, he was charged for murder.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's no way. And I don't know, I just felt like for some reason one thing I loved about the I, Tonya movie was just the relationship. Did you watch that movie?
Yes.
I mean, that came to mind. I'm like, man, I was really into that movie because regardless of whatever going around, like I just really enjoyed seeing the relationship felt real. Not that it was healthy, it wasn't healthy or anything like that. And it didn't reflect, my relationship with my wife or anything like that, or my parents or anything, but at least it felt honest.
Well, and too, like, without experiencing yourself or being, having close friends or anybody that you see that really experiences things, like, you see enough of bits and pieces in the real world to understand that there are abusive, corrosive relationships like that between mother and daughter, husband and wife, whatever. And you see that, and especially in the 90s when, they would send a battered wife home with the husband whose knuckles are bloody because...
And not saying, I'm not saying like, oh, we should have seen him do that even if it wasn't real. I'm saying like, I would have loved to dig into the relationship and seen like that would have been something to see what it was like to live with somebody doing this. And they fast forward to the court stuff, and then you're just seeing a montage, almost a montage. Every 10 minutes we skip a couple weeks or a couple months, and we see progression in the case and his situation, but to what end? And with Zodiac, as you said, we jump around characters, but they were all thematically linked in what this case was doing to them and society, and how what the obsession did to certain investigators.
You saw the impact on like the different characters throughout the course of that. Towards this, you don't get a ton of idea what the impact, like, is it does some faithful recreations of some of the courtroom scenes. Because it's something that was the most infuriating, and I've seen people say this about the documentary and the movie. So the judge that John Malkovich portrays, like how respectfully he treated Bundy and even gave him some like courtroom victories, and at the end of it was saying, basically, well, there's a waste of humanity. I would have loved to have had you here as a prosecutor, as a lawyer, and blah, 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 but you went a different way. It's like, well, no, dude killed at least 30 women and viciously assaulted a number of...
And and they show this at the end, and I knew that. I don't know if I had read it prior to this or what, but I knew that. But even when watching it, I wasn't getting that vibe, and I had never even seen that footage.
Yeah.
But then at the end of the film, they show the footage, and I'm like, even John Malkovich's portrayal didn't have an interesting element, because even he didn't seem as enamored by him as even the documentary footage. You know what I mean?
Because I guess like the concept there is the judge is slightly impressed by this defendant who actually knows a bit about the law and actually makes some decent points at cases. But the point was like eventually he like gets rid of his own counsel, and because they basically were like, oh, we can cut you a deal where it's life in prison and not death penalty if you give up some of these details. And he was so incensed by that he then like fired his lawyer and all this stuff. But
yeah, I knew Ted Bundy could kind of, everybody was taken in by him, so that's why he got so many privileges and stuff. But we didn't get to see that. We just heard he's on the phone with his wife, they're letting me hang out and use the library. You know what I mean? Like we never got to see that, and that is I think the important part of it. this story.
Seeing him
if
con
you're trying
people.
to show the, who he was.
Yeah, I think being able to see him con people into getting these privileges and show that would have been more engaging what they did show. But I mean, like, yeah, the movie, like I said, some people are giving it like a 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10. It's like, well, that's a harsh rating. I don't think it's that bad. It's just watching it, I just didn't come away with, well, what was the real point? Who do I recommend this to? Because some movies you watch them and you immediately know, like, okay, here's the audience for this film. Because there was it the Sharon Tate murders is a recent one where they said they essentially took that story and turned it into a slasher film. And so people who are looking for historical accuracy and stuff like that would be kind of appalled by it. But people who are more general genre fans who want the salaciousness would be okay with it. And it feels like this went the opposite direction.
Well, certain sects of genre fans, because we're genre fans, but we don't necessarily want to lean into that too hard. Yeah, because we're
not the people that go and see a movie and then come back and complain there weren't enough rapes and murders.
Yeah.
But it just feels like, because I have not seen that Sharon Tate murders movie. I've just heard people talking about it. And it seems like this is on the opposite end of the spectrum from that. Like, this one doesn't show anything like that to sell the film or to, kind of rely on that. But in doing so, they kind of stripped it of all the interesting elements.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, like, if we would have just taken some liberties and made some dramatic, like, write it dramatically as far as the dialogue, and there's a different way to build this story. But if for some reason I can't figure out, like, why, you know what I mean? Like, why do this film? And again, I think Zac Efron does a pretty good job. I think most people in this film do a good job at their performances. I think any failings on it, though, probably comes down to the director, only because there wasn't a strong guidance.
And there wasn't, like, a consistent tone. I mean, I think that... and then there's, like, some stuff that I remember really, like, a big deal. James Hetfield was a police officer, so he was the lead singer of Metallica. And he's in it for a small portion. And, like... But, well, too, like, a lot of the story is, like, law enforcement back in that era was kind of bungling. Like, when the Ted Bundy tapes, like, they show, like, the local law enforcement when he was committing murders, how poorly the cases were handled. But you have to figure, like, not everybody's a master detective, and he did go undetected, so obviously something happened, but the movie doesn't really touch on that. There's just it feels like it skips around a lot of the interesting angles of the story. And
we were told that he conned people and everything and was manipulative by his charm, but we weren't shown it, and you don't believe it by watching this film. You don't really get an inside look. And there's nothing here that you can walk out to the real world and be like, oh, I saw Ted Bundy did it in the movie, so you know what I mean? It doesn't make you any more aware of anything other than it's...
So I would come away saying that, kind of getting here to wrapping up thoughts on it. I think that it is like you said, the acting was all good. Like, Zac Efron did a good job. I just think that the job he did, the movie that best utilized that isn't this one. And the perspective of coming from his longtime girlfriend, fiance, is an interesting approach. And then kind of grounds it to make it a little bit more relatable, but they don't do enough with it. They don't show enough of their life together to then make some of the other elements land. Because if somebody really is like this tender, perfect person where you have this amazing relationship, and so much of that allows them to overlook these other kind of, warning signs, like, that's an interesting approach. And I know, too, I think it was partially influenced by the book that the real-life fiancé had written. I have not read that. So, I mean, some of this could be pulling from, like, those accounts and kind of structured like that. I'm not sure. But like I said, it just felt like it skipped over a lot of the interesting elements. Not like I was looking for them to sit here and show, like, a grisly pop music, have pop music playing while Zac Efron's murdering women and stuff. I wasn't looking for that.
Well, they do have a lot of pop music that, like, let's have fun with Zac dancing in the beginning. And, like, it's just, it feels like they infuse some of that to try to give the film a little bit of life, because it feels pretty lifeless for me.
But then they don't really give enough. So it's just like this weird balance. Like, I didn't want to see some fun juxtaposed, like, scene of him murdering people brutally to pop music and him dancing. Like, if it was him dancing at the bar and then killing a girl and stuff.
Yeah. But or you could have done, again, I'm just saying, I would have been fine with some flashes of it or insinuation of it, and then, intercut with him being a charm. You know what I mean? Like, there's no contrast here.
And there's other elements too, like a lot of it, like he had a girlfriend that dumped him that may have been a lot of the inspiration for his craziness. But then...
Again, open it like the Social Network.
Yeah. It's like people are not going to like you, or people are not going to dislike you because you're a nerd.
Yeah.
They'll dislike you because you're an asshole. Like, it's just, it feels like there's a lot of missed opportunity for how they handled it. Like I said,
you could have got an insight. Maybe he cracked with her, and you could get an insight of like, oh, who this person is, and then we reset. Like, again, I'm backseat directing because this whole thing is built, and it's a lot easier to make suggestions once somebody's built something. I know that. I totally know that. But yeah,
it's always really easy to come in and say, well, how would I have done this? But I think looking at
it, easiest thing in the world to do.
It's just it's one of those things where watching it, the entertainment value was kind of all over the place. So in terms of giving this a score like out of 10. It's kind of tough. I don't really know. Like, I would say like maybe a 5. Like, well acted, and it had a good cast because you had John Malkovich and Lily Collins and Zac Efron, and you had some different people that showed up throughout. Like Jeffrey Donovan was his lawyer, like from Burn Notice and Fargo and stuff like that.
Sheldon.
Oh yeah, Jim Parsons is in it as
Says
a lawyer.
the F word.
Yeah. Which is interesting. And then you have some, I'm trying to remember who else, or some other like bit players that show up throughout.
Yeah, but it's like, to what end,
But at the end of the day, I didn't come away with any big takeaways from it. Like, if you're interested in the concept and the cast, like, it's not the worst thing on Netflix. And, because I think it's a step above those really schlocky. So when the Zodiac came out, there was also like the Fincher one. There was also kind of like the knockoff, super low budget approaches at the true crime stuff. I think it's a notch above those, but it's definitely not anywhere close to the same tier of movie as Zodiac. I'm trying to think of other like true crime based movies like that have been good.
Well, while watching it too, I was like, okay, it's up against a lot because in my mind, what I'm comparing this to is Zodiac and Silence of the Lambs. Even though it's not a true crime.
Yeah.
But in my mind, I'm thinking, well, that's like two masterpieces basically.
Yeah.
And I get it, but at the same time, for me, this doesn't even compare to the baseline stereotypical.
Well, because even like Manhunter, which is a series, I think. It's hard to compare a series and a movie, but just like, I'm trying to think like the A and B tier serial killer stuff. Like, you said you have like Zodiac, like in terms of the true world stuff, you have like Zodiac, and then you have some stuff, like even like the Clint Eastwood movie where they're in Alcatraz, I'm forgetting what it was called. Like, that wasn't a serial killer film, but it was just like a true crime movie.
I mean, you haven't. Memories of Murder is so good. It's the director of The Host, but that's based on a true crime, and it's really, really good.
Yeah, I would just say that it does not approach the tier, and then like you said, like the fictionalized serial killer films like Silence of the Lambs, or a lot. It doesn't touch that. So it falls. I don't know what tier you'd really compare it to. Because I can't sit here and think of a movie. It's like, oh, if you like this, you'd like this. For me, I can't even recommend it. Like, honestly, I think a lot of scenes did remind me of Lifetime. Like, when she gets upset or something, all of a sudden we cut to her in the shower crying like this. And I'm like, is this all this shot's going to be? Is just so you know, hey, she's upset. And that's all it was. And I was like, that's very cliche. And then it doesn't build to it.
Then at the end, whenever, I don't remember what happens, but essentially, she has her new boyfriend and I guess her mom's and her friends at the house with her.
Yeah.
And she deals with alcoholism because of this, I think. And so all of a sudden there's just a single shot suddenly pops up in the film, and then they're throwing alcohol in the garbage, and then they're hugging, and it's like, well, I guess the audience is supposed to know that that is a lifetime approach to some of this that this film takes sometimes, and it is so off-putting, and it feels so dishonest when it's not even like this is a totally fictional story where it's like, look, hey, they just saw a lot of movies and they leaned on their cliches and that's all they knew. No, there was real stuff to build on, and they still fell back on so many cliches, but also couldn't put it together. For me, and I went in knowing that some people hated it, and I thought, and that may have colored my impression initially, I thought they hated it because they were so disgusted by the portrayal of Ted Bundy.
Yeah.
And for me, my dislike from it comes from just how much of a mess it is. And again, knowing that there's like, for me, not one good scene in this film just kills it. Like there's no scene where it's like, oh, and out of this entire story, you can't build one great scene.
Well, and
you know what I mean? Like, it's just...
So the director of, and I forgot to mention, Haley Joel Osment's in it.
Yeah. And I like him too. Again, it doesn't, you know, a Disney theatrical special could have the best cast in the world, but if it's not handled right, it does not matter.
And I think like modern day Haley Joel Osment, I think he rocked the beard well. He should probably stick with that. So like the director Joe Berlinger, some other stuff he had done, the Blair Witch 2 Book of Shadows.
Ding, ding, ding. There's clue.
And then he had worked on Homicide, Life on the Street, the documentary series or whatever, Paradise Lost, that was about the triple child murder and the people that where was it at? Was that in Memphis? It was about like another like true crime series of like people are possibly wrongly accused or stuff. So it looked like a lot of his work has focused on, aside from like the Blair Witch stuff, you know, true crime stuff. He also did the documentary Some Kind of Monster for Metallica.
There's a connection.
So that's where James Hetfield probably came in. I think he done some other more recent stuff for him too.
Yeah, and I never want to attack anybody personally. You know what I mean? Like, I just think the end product. You know what I mean? That's what I'm criticizing. I'm not criticizing the person. The end product for me just.
So what's funny is like financially, Blair Witch 2 Book of Shadows, if you like look at it now, was actually pretty successful, at least like, compared to the other more recent sequel.
I at least rented it. I might have went to theaters to see it.
And I remember watching that Metallica documentary, Some Kind of Monster, and enjoying it. I mean, I may have not had the best view of some of the band members after that, but and then like the Ted Bundy tapes, like the documentary series, was engaging, and that is something I would recommend.
It's two different talents, you know what I mean? Those are doing music documentaries and true crime. Like it's all different talents, and yeah, he doesn't seem to have a lot of experience doing narrative films with this style.
Because the Metacritic score is 52, and the IMDb user score is 6.7. So I think the 52, like a 5, is more accurate.
I honestly think.
But it's kind of a bland 5.
And I, you know, it's bad for me to say this, but I feel like this is getting a lot is being forgiven just because people's familiarity with Ted Bundy, people wanting this content. You know what I mean? The people are starved for this. You know, they love this.
If this was a fictional film, it wouldn't get any.
For me, I give it a 3 out of 10. Like I think this was extremely. It just felt shockingly an extremely big mess and shockingly boring for the topic and it being based on a true, you know, just being based on a true events. Like really, this is a flaccid account.
I mean, and two, like I totally see if people were involved in the production of this movie and went to premieres and stuff, how their review of it would be vastly different. Yeah, and stuff like that. But like, because I'd seen some buzz about it locally, just because people are involved with it. But rewatching it, it's like if this wasn't based on a true story or wasn't based on a real life person, I don't think this would be getting very far. No, because it's a true crime it's a true crime story told in a way that they typically aren't, and maybe there's a reason. A lot of times when they do tell them effectively, they kind of stick to at least a format of what you show.
There was no theme building. There was no strong character. Look at a specific character. Like it broke apart. It did not uphold. You know what I mean? It did not uphold its duty to the audience of giving us something to walk away with. And I was thinking, like, is this a situation where Netflix was very hands off, as they're known to possibly be, where maybe they shouldn't have been? You know what I mean? Maybe they should have had some more development on this, and really, because he wrote and directed this, single writer director, right?
I believe so.
I believe so. So again, I'm never attacking the person or creative, and his next film may be a home run. Maybe he saw some stuff he liked in this and that he didn't like. And
so it was Written, so actually it wasn't written and directed by Joe Berlinger.
I'm thinking of my friend Dahmer.
Yeah, so it was written by Michael Werwe, based on the book The Phantom Prince, My Life with Ted Bundy by Elizabeth Kendall, so the actual real life fiance. I think I mentioned, I think it was from her perspective, but I think it just...
And what else did the writer do?
The writer had also done...
And who knows how much the script got changed on set? Because obviously the director is vastly intimate with the source material. So,
so the writer hasn't done a ton else. Let's see. So, the screenplay "Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile" won a 2012 fellowship and made the blacklist, and then also made an adaptation of the New York Times bestseller Lost Girl. So it sounds like this was a blacklist script for years.
Yeah. Dahmer was too. I think the same year, maybe 2014. Maybe I'm wrong, yeah. But I really would be interested in reading this script now, because I want to know if this script, if this film was stuck to that script closely, and if there's something I'm missing here, but. Or if it was changed a lot in production. I don't know.
Yep, so that'll wrap up our discussion of... this title's so long and easy to forget. It's Extremely...
Wicked.
Let me go back to the page. Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. I think they could have maybe trimmed that title down a little bit to make it a little bit easier to
I guess
discuss. Imagine if this is in theaters. It's like, I need to go to Extremely Vile.
Yeah, I guess Netflix, anything goes. They can make it, as long as they want.
But everybody's just like, oh, the Ted Bundy movie. I'm sure if you search Ted Bundy on Netflix, this comes up.
Yeah, or it's definitely probably recommended as soon as you watch that documentary series, because the documentary series is recommended as soon as you finish this. Yeah,
but that'll wrap up our discussion of that film. And if you want to find more of what we're doing, go to housebyvideostore.com. Find links to all of our social media accounts, to Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all that good stuff. And our YouTube channel is still getting a good amount of traffic from the short film Plucked that Chad directed. It's kind of a cryptid story that's out there now, so you can check that out if you haven't, or any of our other short films.
We're big in India.
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of views in India from...
I think I should make Chad a shirt that says big in India.
Because I think it's got, it's over 700,000 views now. I forgot what the number is.
I told you guys, I was Googling some stuff. I'm like, why are we getting... And apparently YouTube has blown up in India the past couple of years.
Yeah.
And it's just exploded. They got a lot of users, but I don't know what happened, if there was infrastructure, if what, but yeah, I guess it's...
For whatever reason...
It's a very large market.
That video ended up in the browse feature, so when you open up the YouTube app or the site, like the videos it shows in your browse section, it showed up there in India for some reason, and in the U.S., because there was a good tens of thousands of views from the U.S. too, but for whatever reason, it really took off there, and then some of our other shorts got some views off that too, not anywhere near as many. I think there may have been a little bit of a barrier on some of them of people not quite understanding what we were going for, especially A Brush with Death, because that one has some intentional campy elements, and people are commenting like, I don't understand this. And then, but so all of our stuff is on housebyvideostore.com. You find links to everything there. You can also go to hbtvsfilms.com to see links to all of our short films, because Chad built a custom site that has all of the short films and some screen grabs, information from it. It has it's up to date with all the shorts, so you can check that out there as well. And then if you want to find us specifically on the internet, you can find me on Instagram at @TheWilliamCaps.
And I'm at BlevinSean on Twitter.
And that'll wrap up this episode of the House Video Store Podcast. Thanks for listening.